Have you ever found yourself standing just outside a doorway? Maybe it's like a high-stakes meeting at work or a crowded family gathering or even just dinner with a very specific group of
Oh
friends.
yeah, definitely. The pre-game deep breath.
Right, exactly. You take that deep breath and you subconsciously shift gears. You adjust your vocabulary,
Yeah.
your energy, maybe even your
Or
posture.
shape-shifting, basically.
Yeah, you're juggling multiple identities, trying to figure out how to be authentically you while like simultaneously adapting to the heavy expectations of whatever space you're about to walk into.
Which is exhausting.
It's utterly exhausting, right?
Anytime.
Like you're constantly translating yourself for different audiences.
It is a profound and honest, almost universal anxiety, especially
Mm.
today. We carry um, this really rigid expectation that authenticity means being completely uniform.
That you have to be the exact same person everywhere.
Exactly. We have this idea that you should be the exact same person with the exact same presentation 100% of the time, no matter the context. We treat identity like a monolith.
A monolith, yeah. Just a giant, immovable rock.
Right, like a solid, immovable rock. And if that rock changes shape, depending on the weather or the room, well, we immediately worry it's somehow fake.
But what if being a monolith is actually a terrible strategy for long-term survival?
That is the big question.
What if the most powerful, most successful way to navigate a really complicated, fractured world is not to be a rock, but to be a bridge?
To be porous.
Yes, to be porous, endlessly adaptable, and to hold massive contradictions without breaking. And that is exactly what today's deep dive is about. We have a really unique stack of source material today.
We do. It's titled MacMaliEmpire.pdf.
Yeah, and it takes this incredibly unique approach to figuring all this out. We're looking at one of history's greatest superpowers, the medieval Mali Empire.
But not just as a dry historical timeline.
No, not at all. We're analyzing it through the psychological lens of a modern persona that the author calls Mac.
It's such a brilliant framework. Mac is basically a stand-in for anyone grappling with social fragmentation.
Right, he's that guy dealing with intense pressure, trying to survive in environments that don't always understand him.
Using acute social intelligence to navigate the spaces between different groups, he's the guy who can seamlessly blend in with the jocks and the nerds, the performers and the quiet intellectuals.
And the core argument we're exploring today in this deep dive is that the Mali Empire functioned exactly like Mac.
But on a civilizational scale.
Exactly. We're going to explore how Mali thrived in an incredibly chaotic medieval world, not through brute force or, demanding total uniformity, but through brilliant, agile adaptation.
And what that civilizational strategy actually teaches us about navigating our own complex lives and our own layered identities.
So to do that, we really have to start at the foundation. We're talking about West Africa, right? Emerging in the 13th century.
Yes, post-Ghana Empire. Right in the Sahel region.
Mali rises up and becomes an absolute powerhouse. But its success is completely rooted in the physical reality of where it was built.
You literally cannot separate the psychology of this empire from its geography.
Because the environment forced it to become the ultimate connective tissue. Let's talk about that transitional zone.
Yeah, so we're looking at the Western Sahel and the Upper Niger River. This is modern-day Mali, Senegal, Mauritania, Guinea, and Niger. Think about the physical tension of this space.
It's not like the lush, easy living of the Egyptian river valleys.
No, not at all. It is the ultimate transitional zone. To the north, you have the Sahara Desert.
Which is brutal.
One of the most unforgiving landscapes on the planet, but also a massive highway for global trade. And then to the south, you have the lush, fertile savanna and forest regions.
And Mali is just sitting right in the middle of this gradient.
Exactly. Right into the transition.
It makes me think of the ultimate cross-platform operating system.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right? Like if you build a piece of software that only runs on one specific type of machine, it's incredibly fragile. But Mali's geography meant it was the connective tissue between entirely different hardware.
Different biomes entirely.
Yeah, it had to link the desert caravan routes, bringing in luxury goods with the pasture lands where the nomads grazed their herds, and the heavy farming zones and the busy river towns.
And if Mali is the operating system in this analogy, then the Niger River have to be the main data bus.
The thing actually moving the information and the resources back and forth.
Exactly. Because it's not just a straight line of water. It has this massive inland delta, a huge network of channels and lakes that act like a giant sponge.
A sponge? How does that work?
It floods annually.
Yeah.
And it deposits this really rich silt that makes intense agriculture possible right on the edge of the desert.
Wow, so right next to the sand, you have massive farming.
Yes, it is the data bus, the agricultural engine, and the medieval superhighway all at once. And because of this geography, the political economy of the region could never be static.
Right, you can't just sit still in a transitional zone.
You have to coordinate movement. You have to manage the exchange between the people who grow grain, the people who mine gold, and the people who cross the desert.
Okay, let's unpack the actual mechanics of that coordination then. Because if I'm the emperor, the Mansa, and I'm sitting at the center of this operating system, managing all these wildly different biomes and cultures, my first instinct is that I need an iron fist.
You'd think so. A
Right.
massive centralized federal government.
Right. I need strict rules to keep the desert nomads and the river farmers on the exact same page.
But everything we know about medieval governance says that level of micromanagement is just impossible without modern communication.
Right. No cell phones, no internet. You can't micromanage a town 1,000 miles away.
It was impossible. And that is why Mali relied on the concept of layered power.
Layered power. Okay, break that down.
They didn't build a rigid bureaucracy with federal agents dictating laws in every village. They governed this huge, varied territory through a deeply negotiated mix of central prestige and local autonomy.
So the Mansa at the center held immense power, but the distant regions were governed indirectly.
Exactly. Local rulers, kings, chiefs, village elders, they kept their positions. They kept their local customs and their day-to-day authority.
Wait, I have to challenge the stability of that.
Go for it.
If I'm a local chief, right, and I'm 1,000 miles away from the capital, I have my own farmers, my own local economy, my own warriors, why don't I just keep the wealth?
A very fair question.
If the central government is just this distant concept, what is actually stopping a local province from just completely ignoring the Mansa, how does layered power not just immediately devolve into a chaotic free-for-all?
You are hitting on the exact vulnerability of the system.
Oh.
And the answer is leverage.
Leverage, okay.
The Mansa didn't just ask nicely. The center controlled the macroeconomic lifelines.
The lifeline. So what does that mean practically?
Well, yes, a local chief could grow his own millet, right? But he could not produce his own salt.
Oh, wow, salt.
Salt came from the deep Sahara,
Mm-hmm.
and the Mansa controlled the distribution network. Without salt, you cannot preserve food, you cannot maintain livestock, and your people will literally suffer.
So it's an absolute necessity.
And furthermore, the center controlled the flow of gold to the international market. If you rebelled, you were cut off from the global economy.
Ah, so it's basically an economic chokehold disguised as a franchise model.
A franchise model is a great way to put it.
Right. You run your local province your way, but the corporate headquarters controls the supply chain. If you want the essential goods, you pay the franchise fee, which was the tribute to the Mansa, and you respect the logo on the door.
Precisely. And, it wasn't just economic leverage either. It was also psychological and cultural.
How so?
The Mansa maintained order through dynastic legitimacy. There was this deep-seated, culturally ingrained belief that this specific family had the spiritual right to rule.
So it wasn't just about money, it was about destiny.
Right. And later on, they layered the prestige of Islam on top of that, using a shared global religion to bond the elites together. It was a really sophisticated web of hostage-taking, sometimes literal, with the sons of local chiefs raised at the capital, along with religious authority and supply chain monopoly.
A serious high-wire balancing act, which maps perfectly onto our psychological stand in Mac.
It really does.
Mac doesn't control his different friend groups by demanding they all act the exact same. He doesn't tell the jocks to read comic books or the nerds to go play football.
He governs his social life through layered power.
Yeah, he is the central node, the guy who knows everyone, and he maintains his position by being the essential bridge between them. He provides the social leverage.
And just like Mac's social maneuvering requires a lot of underlying energy, Mali's layered power structure required serious, consistent funding.
Right, because spiritual legitimacy does not actually pay the bills.
Exactly. You cannot maintain a monopoly on trade routes or project dynastic prestige without an incredibly robust economic engine. We really had to look at how they actually paid for this massive operation.
So the entire system ran on the trans-Saharan lifeline. That was the economic engine.
Yes. Mali was not some isolated kingdom cut off from the rest of the planet. It was deeply plugged into a global medieval system.
Connecting North African states, the wider Islamic world, and indirectly feeding right into the economies of the Mediterranean and Europe.
And to understand the sheer scale of this, You have to understand the mechanics of a trans-Saharan caravan.
Walk me through it, because I think people imagine just like a few guys walking with camels.
Right, it wasn't just a few merchants walking with camels. These were massive, highly organized logistical operations. A caravan could consist of thousands of camels.
Thousands.
Thousands, requiring deep, deep knowledge of the desert, navigating by the stars, knowing exactly where the seasonal wells were located, and managing the intense physical toll of crossing one of the most hostile environments on Earth.
It's the medieval equivalent of launching a fleet of cargo ships across an ocean.
Exactly, fraught with immense risk, but offering astronomical rewards.
And the cargo moving south was primarily salt, which you mentioned earlier was absolutely essential for survival.
Yes, traded ounce for ounce, often for the most famous export moving north, gold. Mali was one of the primary global sources of gold during this era. Mediterranean and Islamic markets were absolutely starved for bullion, and West Africa was the engine providing it.
But we also have to look impartially at the darker mechanics of this trade. The source material is really clear that human beings were a major part of this economic engine.
Yes, that is a crucial point of historical reality. The trans-Saharan trade routes were also routes for enslaved people.
Right.
Slavery in the medieval Sahel and the wider Islamic world was a complex, deeply entrenched system. It often functioned as a mechanism of wealth accumulation and social status for the elites.
It was a brutal reality of the era.
It was. And it provided a significant portion of the labor and economic value that funded the empire's expansion. The wealth of Mali was built on a foundation of unequal power dynamics, taxation, and forced labor.
Which is important to keep in mind. Looking at the sheer volume of wealth moving through these routes, it is really easy to see why Mali was so powerful. They were the main hub, processing the most valuable commodities on the global network.
The server for the global internet, essentially.
Right. If medieval trade was the internet, Mali was a high-speed server for gold. But what I find truly fascinating is that they didn't just put all their chips on the international gold market.
No, they were much smarter than that.
They didn't just become a hollow petrostate of the medieval world, relying entirely on one single export.
This is where we see the true genius of Mali's adaptability. They engaged in what the notes call diversifying scale for survival.
Okay, diversifying scale.
Think about it. If you only rely on long-distance luxury trade, your empire is incredibly fragile.
Because what happens if a war breaks out in North Africa and the caravans just stop coming?
Or what happens if a key well dries up in the Sahara?
The server goes down and you have no backup.
Exactly. So Mali ran dual economies simultaneously. Alongside the massive, glamorous trans-Saharan trade, they had incredibly robust, quiet local subsistence systems running on the ground at the exact same time.
So what did that look like locally?
You had farmers in the inland delta using the floodwaters to grow massive yields of millet, sorghum, and African rice. You had pastoralists managing vast herds of cattle. You had intense local craft production and regional river markets.
Ah, so the local economy is the index fund.
Love that.
Yeah. The gold trade is the high-risk, high-reward venture capital that gets all the headlines and builds the massive mosques. But the millet farmers are the steady, localized index fund that actually ensures the population doesn't starve when the venture capital market takes a hit.
It is the ultimate hedge against instability.
And recognizing that duality, it fundamentally changes how we should define technology when we look at history.
It really does. We are so conditioned to look for physical gadgets.
Oh, absolutely. When I think of a powerful medieval empire, I immediately look for the secret weapon. Did they have a new type of catapult?
Right, or did they forge a stronger steel sword?
Yeah, what was the physical gadget that gave Mali the edge?
If you look for gadgets, you will completely miss why Mali was a superpower.
So no secret weapons.
The innovation wasn't mechanical, it was structural. Mali's real technologies were systems innovations.
Systems over gadgets. Okay, walk me through exactly what that means on the ground.
Take their architecture, for example. The monumental structures of Mali are built from earth, mud, brick, and timber.
Right, mud.
And to a modern Western eye, mud might seem primitive compared to European stone castles. But it is an incredibly sophisticated technology, perfectly adapted to the environment.
Because of the heat?
The Sahel experiences extreme diurnal temperature variation, blistering heat during the day and sharp cold at night.
Right, because there's no moisture in the air to hold the heat.
Exactly, so they use the thermal mass of earthen architecture.
How does thermal mass work?
The thick mud brick walls absorb the intense heat of the sun throughout the day, keeping the interior incredibly cool. Then at night, when the temperature drops, the walls slowly radiate that stored heat back into the building, keeping it warm.
Wow, so it's passive, highly engineered climate control.
That is a systems innovation.
Hmm.
Or look at the intellectual infrastructure. They didn't just hoard gold. They built complex networks of scholarship, bringing together jurists, astronomers, and theologians. The system itself is the flex.
It's the difference between inventing a sharper sword and inventing the concept of global supply chain management.
Precisely.
But a massive, complex system like that does not just run itself on pure logic, right? You cannot build a lasting empire solely on thermal mass and caravan logistics.
No, you need human buy-in.
You need a narrative that captures the imagination of millions of people across completely different biomes and convinces them that they actually belong to the same unified project.
Which brings us to the PR machine of the empire.
Yeah.
Heroes, villains, and writing history.
Yes, the PR machine. And there is no better example of medieval PR than the story of the founder, Sundiata Keita.
The 13th century leader who emerged to unite the fragmented Mande states and lay the foundation for everything we've just discussed.
The comeback king. The story of Sundiata is just phenomenal, and it's preserved through the oral traditions of the griots.
We really have to talk about the griots for a second.
Yeah, because they are not just guys who tell stories around a fire.
Not at all.
They are essentially the human blockchain of the medieval Sahel.
That's a great metaphor.
They are the official historians, the musicians, the diplomats. If a griot codifies your story, it becomes the undeniable reality of the culture. And the story they tell about Sundiata is a masterpiece of political framing.
It really is.
Yeah.
He is not remembered as a privileged prince who inherited a stable kingdom. The epic frames him as a child born with a severe physical disability, unable to walk for years.
Right. He's mocked by his rivals, pushed to the margins of society, and eventually forced into exile.
It is the classic underdog narrative.
It's an anime protagonist arc. He is doubted, he is marginalized, but he slowly builds his strength in exile.
He gathers allies, overcomes his physical limitations through sheer willpower, and then returns to defeat his enemies and unite the fractured states.
It is a narrative designed perfectly to emphasize resilience. If you are a citizen of Mali and your founder is the ultimate underdog who built an empire through sheer grit that deeply informs your own cultural identity.
It gives everyone a shared struggle to look up to.
But every great underdog needs an insurmountable villain.
Okay? And in the Sundiata epic, that villain is Sumaro Kante, the king of the Soso Empire.
The guy he defeats to unite the states.
Exactly. The griots remember Sumaro as a terrifying tyrant, a man of extreme cruelty, and even a dark sorcerer who used magic to oppress his people.
Okay, I have to push back here because this feels almost too perfect. Didn't the legend say Sumaro literally wore clothes made of human skin and kept the skulls of his enemies in his room?
That's what the oral traditions say, yes.
That sounds less like a historical figure and more like a comic book supervillain. I really struggle to believe he was just this cartoonish embodiment of evil.
Your skepticism is exactly right, and this is where we have to apply critical historical analysis.
Right.
History is always written by the victors. Sumaro Kante represented the old power structure. He was the dominant force in the region before Mali rose.
So he wasn't just a monster.
He was likely a highly competent, ruthless, and effective ruler who had built his own strong state.
So we are just watching his cutscene from the winner's perspective.
Exactly. The PR machine of Mali required him to be an evil sorcerer to justify Sundiata's conquest.
Because if Sumaro was just a regular king, then Sundiata is an aggressor.
Right.
But if Sumaro is a demonic tyrant, then Sundiata is a savior. It is narrative warfare.
Precisely. It is a brilliant psychological strategy to legitimize the new empire. But if Sundiata built the foundation and established the narrative, it was a ruler in the 14th century who took that PR machine and broadcast it to the entire known world.
Ah, Mansa Musa.
Mansa Musa.
The global wealth flex. If Sundiata is the gritty origin story, Mansa Musa is the blockbuster sequel with an unlimited CGI budget.
That's spot on. The stories of his Hajj, his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, are legendary.
We're talking about a caravan of tens of thousands of people, right?
Tens of thousands of people, officials, soldiers, and dozens of camels, each carrying hundreds of pounds of pure gold dust.
And the economic impact of that journey is one of the most famous data points in medieval history.
Yes. As he passed through Egypt, he distributed so much gold as gifts, as alms in the markets, that he fundamentally devalued the currency.
Right, let's look at the mechanics of that. How exactly does giving away money ruin an economy?
It is classic supply and demand. The Egyptian economy relied on the relative scarcity of gold to maintain its value. Mansa Musa flooded the market with such an overwhelming supply of bullion that the purchasing power of gold just plummeted.
Wow, so the money became worthless.
The cost of basic goods skyrocketed because the currency used to buy them was suddenly everywhere.
Yeah.
It caused massive crippling inflation that took years, if not decades, for the regional economy to recover from.
It is the ultimate economic flex. You are so rich, you accidentally destroy the economy of a neighboring superpower just by buying souvenirs.
It really is wild.
But I have to ask, is that actually good governance? We constantly hear about the gold. But was Mansa Musa just a guy with an unlimited bank account going on a massive ego trip? Was this just a surface-level stunt?
It is very easy to look at it as an ego trip, but that misses the strategic depth of the move entirely.
So there was a point to crashing the economy.
Well, not crashing the economy, but the
Yeah.
pilgrimage itself was God-tier diplomatic networking. You have to remember Mali was incredibly wealthy, but geographically it was on the periphery of the Islamic heartland.
Right, they were far away from the center of the action.
Mansa Musa needed to put Mali on the map, literally. He was broadcasting stability, immense power, and deep religious piety to the entire Mediterranean and Middle Eastern world.
So the gold wasn't just showing off, it was a marketing budget to solve a brain drain problem.
Exactly. He used that trip to attract human capital by demonstrating that Mali was a center of unimaginable wealth and devout Islam. He drew the attention of the brightest minds of the era.
He's basically saying, look, we have the funding, come work for us.
He convinced scholars, jurists, poets, and master architects, like the famous Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, to return with him to the Sahel. He used the hype to fund the development of cities like Timbuktu into massive globally recognized centers of learning.
So the PR stunt had a massive, tangible return on
A
investment,
huge ROI, yes.
which perfectly sets up the next crucial question. Mansa Musa brings all this global attention, these foreign architects and these brilliant Islamic scholars back to the Sahel.
Right.
How did the actual people living in Mali process this? How did the empire blend this massive influx of global Islamic influence with the deep indigenous roots of the people who actually farmed the land?
To understand that cultural blend, we really have to look at the sharp divide between the urban centers and the rural landscape.
Yeah.
The structural reality of Mali was like an arena.
An arena.
The cities, places like Timbuktu and Guinea, were the luxury seats. These were the hubs of this new blended globalism.
Walk me through the mechanics of a city like Timbuktu during this peak. What is actually happening in the luxury seats?
Timbuktu became a metropolis of intellectual commerce. You have the monumental mud brick mosques we discussed earlier, acting as the physical anchors of the city. But the real engine was the people we can call the quiet architects.
The scholars.
Yes, the scholars, the clerics, and the merchants. While the emperors were out expanding borders, these scholars were meticulously preserving and debating manuscripts.
What kind of manuscripts?
We are talking about thousands of texts covering Islamic jurisprudence, theology, advanced mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. It was a highly literate, deeply connected urban elite that was in constant dialogue with the rest of the Islamic world.
But if you walk out of the city gates, right, if you leave the luxury seats and go down into general admission, the rural villages along the river, the reality is completely different.
Night and day.
The vast majority of the population were farmers, fishers, and herders. Their daily lives were not dictated by theological debates over Arabic texts.
No, their lives were dictated by the brutal realities of the Sahelian climate. When does the river flood? When do the rains come?
And their social structures were built around deep kinship ties and traditional religious practices honoring the spirits of the land and the ancestors.
And this is exactly where the genius of the Mali Empire's survival strategy becomes apparent.
How so?
If you have an urban elite deeply tied to global Islam and a massive rural population deeply tied to indigenous traditions, how do you prevent a cultural civil war?
My instinct looking at most empires in history is that the rulers at the top enforce a cultural wipeout.
Right. Forced assimilation.
They conquer an area and say, okay, the state religion is now X. Everyone must speak our language, pray exactly how we pray, and abandon everything your ancestors taught you.
But Mali did not do that.
Yeah.
The rulers recognized that enforcing total uniformity across such a vast, diverse landscape, especially when your power relies on layered indirect control, would just invite endless rebellion.
They couldn't afford to be rigid.
Exactly. So they blended. They embraced Islamic belief at the elite level because it provided incredible tools for statecraft.
Tools like what?
A unified legal system for long-distance trade, diplomatic prestige, and a literate bureaucracy.
But simultaneously, they maintained and respected the older Mande traditions on the ground.
Yes.
The Mansa was a devout Muslim on Friday at the mosque, but he also derived his core political legitimacy from being the traditional spiritual leader of the land.
Exactly. It was not an either situation. It was a profound and. You could be plugged into the global network A&D, be fiercely local.
You could trade using Islamic law A&D, pour libations to the earth's spirits for a good harvest.
The state did not demand purity. It demanded participation.
It is the ultimate juxtaposition. You have the Islamic scholars in the cities meticulously copying Arabic manuscripts and completely coexisting with them. You have the griots out in the villages and even in the royal court.
The griots were dropping bars before the scholars were filling notebooks.
Yeah, they were preserving the lineages, the political memory, and the emotional truth of the people through rhythm, performance, and speech.
This layered coexistence, this ability to hold multiple, sometimes contradictory realities together without forcing a single uniform identity, is the absolute hallmark of Mali's adaptation.
And this brings us to the profound psychological parallel that the sources highlight. This is where we fully map the mechanics of the Mali Empire onto our modern persona Mac.
Yes, let's dive deep into the Mac reflection. Because everything we just described about Mali sitting between the desert and the savannah, balancing the gold trade with the millet farmers holding Islamic scholars and traditional griots in the same political system, that is exactly what Mac is doing in his own life.
It is a striking parallel. Mac is a persona navigating a socially fractured modern environment.
Right.
He uses acute social intelligence to move through spaces that do not fully hold or understand him. Think about the psychological tension of Mac's daily life.
It's intense.
He sits between being a jock and a nerd. He has to be a performer to entertain one group, but a grounded truth teller with another. He projects outward levity and charm, but carries a heavy internal complexity and pain.
The struggle for Mac is, can I stay real while moving through spaces that totally misread me or that demand I only show one part of myself?
And Mali is answering that exact question on a civilizational level. Mali gained immense prestige through Islam and global trade, but it refused to just become a carbon copy of Egypt or Morocco.
It took the outside pressure, the expectations, and the global language, and it remixed them into something uniquely Sahelian.
Mac does the same thing. He takes the social pressure of a room, reads the expectations, and adapts without entirely losing his core self.
And the overlap becomes even more profound when we look at the dynamic between performance and reality.
Yeah.
The infrastructure beneath the shine.
But let's break that down. Mansa Musa's Goldestog, the massive caravans, the spectacular mud brick mosques, that is the shine of the Mali Empire.
The bling.
It is the blockbuster PR. It gets all the attention, and it makes the rest of the world marvel at them. Just like Mac's funny, charming, vibe-heavy personality is his shine.
It is his social currency. It is what people see first. It is what makes people invite him to the party.
But if you only look at the shine, if you only see the gold or the charm, you completely underestimate the massive, grueling effort required to sustain the system.
Underneath Mali's gold was a heavy, complex infrastructure. We talked about it, the lethal logistics of the caravan routes, the delicate political balancing of layered power, the exhausting agricultural labor in the inland delta.
It took massive, unseen structural effort to produce that glamorous exterior.
And what is underneath Mac's effortless charm? What is underneath his smooth social navigation?
It is extreme emotional translation. It is the exhausting, unseen work of identity management. He's constantly computing the room, processing his own internal complexities, and doing the heavy lifting to bridge the gap between his reality and the people around him.
Both the empire and a persona are massive, complex systems that look completely effortless on the surface, but are paddling furiously underwater.
Which leads to the most powerful philosophical conclusion of this analysis. The sources assert a paradigm-shifting idea here. Adaptation is not weakness, it is the highest form of identity.
That is the core thesis right there. Adaptation is not weakness, it is the highest form of identity.
We usually think of adapting as compromising. We think that if you change your behavior to fit a room, you are being fake.
You are giving up a piece of your authentic self.
But this framework argues the exact opposite.
It argues that the ability to hold contradictions is the ultimate strength. Mali and Mac both survive a fractured, chaotic reality by turning contradiction into culture.
They turn the awkwardness of not fitting perfectly into a single box into the very mechanism of connection.
Mali took brutal geography, vast distances, and differing religious beliefs, and instead of trying to flatten them into a single monolith, turn them into a thriving dynamic system.
Mac takes the tension of differing social expectations and turns it into empathy and belonging. It is a total mastery of the balancing act.
But, and this is the crucial reality check we have to face.
Right.
If extreme adaptability and layered identity are so incredibly powerful, if being a bridge is the ultimate survival strategy, why are we talking about the Mali Empire in the past tense?
Yeah, why did it eventually fall? We have to look at the slow unraveling of the system and what it teaches us about the absolute limits of balance.
That is the tragedy of any complex system. And the most important thing to understand about the fall of Mali is that it was not an explosion.
It wasn't an anime-style final battle.
No, it was an erosion. Mali did not collapse overnight because a massive foreign army breached the walls of the capital. It was a slow, agonizing unraveling. It lost map control tile by tile, decade by decade.
Like a strategy game where you make a few bad resource allocations and suddenly you are just slowly bleeding out territory over a century.
Exactly.
Let's walk through the mechanics of that unraveling. We can break it down into 4 main pillars of decline. Pillar number 1, decentralization.
This is the inherent danger of layered power. The empire simply got too big.
So the franchise model failed.
When your governance relies on negotiated autonomy and the prestige of the center, physical size and distance are your absolute enemies. Over time, as the empire stretched further, the central authority of the Mansa naturally weakened at the edges.
Because they couldn't project the leverage anymore.
Local rulers in those distant provinces looked around and realized the center wasn't actually projecting power. They slowly stopped listening. They stopped sending tribute.
It is exactly like a massive group chat where the admin tries to make a plan and everyone just mutes the thread.
That is a perfect way to describe it.
No one officially announces they're leaving the group, but everyone is completely ignoring the center and just doing their own thing.
Which leads to pillar number 2, the loss of trade control.
And this is fatal. If your entire central power base, your wealth and your leverage over those local rulers are built on controlling the trans-Saharan trade routes, what happens when those routes physically shift?
Because geography is not static.
Hmm.
Over time, due to environmental changes and the rise of new markets, new trade hubs emerged to the east outside of Mali's direct control.
Other regional powers began securing the flow of gold and salt.
If the data bus reroutes, the operating system crashes. Mali lost its monopoly on the connectivity.
If you can't control the salt, you can't threaten the local chiefs, which leads directly to pillar number 3, internal instability.
It is the classic vulnerability of dynastic systems. A complex balancing act requires a master acrobat.
Like Sundiata or Musa.
Right. Mali had a run of incredibly strong, charismatic leaders who could hold the delicate layers together through sheer willpower, political genius, and prestige. But greatness is rarely hereditary.
Eventually, you get succession struggles. You get weaker rulers who lack the political capital to negotiate the contradictions.
And a system built on layered power cannot survive a weak center. The internal gravity simply fails and the disparate parts begin to pull apart.
Which opens the door for the final blow. Pillar number 4, the Songhai Empire.
Yes. The Songhai actually started as a vassal state, a subordinate part of the Mali Empire itself.
So they were inside the house.
But as Mali weakened from decentralization and internal strife, Songhai saw the opportunity. They broke away, grew their own military and economic strength, capitalized on those shifting trade routes, and eventually turned around and conquered the very heart of their former masters, taking key cultural and economic centers like Timbuktu.
The ultimate historical trope. The student realizes the master is fatigued, breaks away, and takes the throne.
Though history is relentless, the Songhai Empire eventually falls too later, crumbling under invasion from Morocco. The cycle of empires rising, balancing, and falling in the Sahel never really stops.
But the core takeaway from Mali's unraveling is profound. Mali was never a purely unified monolithic bloc. It was always a high-wire balancing act.
It balanced the local farmers with the global merchants' indigenous tradition, with Islamic scholarship and central power, with regional autonomy.
And when you are walking a tightrope, you don't need a cannonball to knock you off. You just need the wind to change direction or your core muscles to get slightly fatigued.
When the internal structure lost its support, the empire didn't shatter like glass. It just unraveled like a worn-out tapestry.
It unraveled. That is a terrifying but beautiful way to put it. So what does this all mean for you listening to this right now? Let's synthesize everything we have unpacked today.
We started by looking at a medieval superpower through the lens of a modern person, trying to survive the exhausting pressure of social fragmentation.
And what we discovered is that Mali wasn't just an empire that dug up gold and eventually faded into history. It was a spectacular living bridge.
It was a civilization that figured out the mechanics of connecting entirely different worlds.
It carried vast cultural differences and held massive contradictions together in a highly functional system, until eventually the internal weight and external shifts were too much to bear.
It teaches us that you can be immensely powerful and incredibly complex at the exact same time.
Holding multiple identities, whether you are a sprawling empire blending global Islamic scholarship with ancient local traditions, or you are a person named Mac blending different social masks to find genuine belonging, that is not a weakness.
That is a massive strength. It is the absolute highest form of adaptability.
But it comes with a severe warning label. It only works if your internal infrastructure, your core emotional and structural foundation, is actively maintained.
Because the moment you stop doing the heavy, unseen internal work, the moment the central gravity fails, the outer layers inevitably start to drift away.
The mask slips, the trade routes shift,
Yeah.
and the system unravels.
Which brings us right back to that doorway we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive.
Right. The next time you find yourself standing outside a room, taking that deep breath, and getting ready to shift your energy or adjust your vocabulary to match the expectations inside, I want you to remember that you aren't being fake.
No, you are deploying a highly sophisticated survival strategy that built one of the greatest empires in human history.
You are being a bridge. You are being the connective tissue.
But bridges endure incredible stress, and they require constant maintenance to stay standing.
Exactly. Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over today. We just spent this entire conversation exploring how both an ancient empire and a modern persona survive by mastering their trade routes, the flow of ideas, the connections, the emotional translations, and the adaptations that keep them perfectly balanced in a fractured world.
But as the fall of Mali shows us with brutal clarity, trade routes inevitably shift. The world moves.
So take a hard look at your own life right now. What are the vital trade routes of your own identity, your relationships, or your career? What are the specific connections you rely on to keep your balance? And more importantly, are those routes quietly shifting while you aren't looking? And is your internal infrastructure strong enough to adapt before things start to unravel?